In this chapter we're going to talk about the reproductive system. This is a system of organs that, of course, through sexual reproduction produces an offspring. And the advantage to sexual reproduction is that there's a lot of genetic diversity acquired through genetic recombination and independent assortment of genes, or chromosomes I should say, which takes place during meiosis, which is how we form the gametes, sperm and egg. Production of the gametes is the function of the gonads, the testes which produce the sperm, and the ovaries which produce the eggs, or the ova. The gonads are also going to be responsible for producing the sex hormones, androgens like testosterone in males and estrogen and progesterone in females. And then in addition to the gonads, the reproductive system also includes the accessory reproductive organs. These would be external genitalia associated with reproduction and the ducts and the glands. Alright, so in this lecture I'm going to talk about the anatomy of the male reproductive system, and then in the next lecture I'll talk about the physiology of the male reproductive system, and then I'll do the same for the female. Alright, so the gonads in the male, of course, are the testes. They produce the gametes that are known as sperm in the male, and obviously the testes are contained within the scrotum. The sperm that develops in the testes is going to travel through the epididymis, then the ductus deferens, through the ejaculatory duct, and then finally into the urethra for export from the body. Also associated with the male reproductive system are the seminal glands, the prostate, and the bulbourethral glands. This shows an overview of the male reproductive anatomy, beginning with the testes here, the gonads where the sperm are created, and they are transported from there into the epididymis, eventually to the ductus deferens, which is going to travel up into the body, over and behind the urinary bladder, and then the sperm are going to meet up with secretions from the seminal gland in the ejaculatory duct, which then joins up with the urethra in the middle of the prostate gland. And from the prostate gland through the urethra, there's going to be some joining up with fluids from the bulbourethral gland here, and then the urethra continues through the external genitalia. The testes are contained within the scrotum, which is a sac of skin that's going to hold the gonads outside the body cavities. And that's important because production of sperm, known as spermatogenesis, has to be at a temperature that's lower than normal body temperature. So the scrotum is skin and some superficial fascia that's going to contain everything, and then within that you have the tunica vaginalis, which is an offshoot of the peritoneum that's going to surround each testicle. And inside the tunica vaginalis you have the tunica albuginea, which is the whitish coating on the outside of each testes. Supporting the testes are what's called spermatic cords. It's a group of nerves and blood vessels and lymphatic vessels, as well as the ductus deferens, that travel from the testes back into the pelvic cavity. They go through what's known as the inguinal ring. There's a little hole here in this connective tissue. And then there's some muscle that holds the whole thing to the body. So the sperm is produced out here. It travels up through the ductus deferens, which is going to deliver to the sperm outside the body. We have our arterial blood supply through the testicular artery. Again, this is part of the spermatic cord, along with nerves and lymphatic vessels, and this vein complex here known as the pampiniform venous plexus, which is a network of veins that's going to help cool the arterial blood. If you see the testicular artery travels through this pampiniform venous plexus. And arterial blood has more heat in it than venous blood does, because as the blood travels through the capillary beds, it loses some heat in the form of friction. And so the venous blood is a little bit cooler. And so this venous blood here is helping to cool the arterial blood. And remember, the testes have to be at a lower temperature than our body temperature in order to produce sperm. So this is part of that whole process, cooling the arterial blood before it makes it to the testes. And inside the testes you have lobules, which are little divisions of the testes where you're going to find these seminiferous tubules. The seminiferous tubules are the site of spermatogenesis, or sperm production. So the seminiferous tubules are little tubes. They've got an opening on the inside, and that's where the sperm are going to get formed. through spermatogenesis. They start from spermatogenic cells. And there are also another type of cells called cystinocytes that are going to help nurture and provide the support that the developing sperm are going to require in the seminiferous tubule. Around the seminiferous tubules in the testicles are these cells called interstitial endocrine cells. They used to be called Sertoli cells. And these are the cells that are producing the androgens, testosterone. So we have androgens that are produced in the adrenal cortex, if you recall, but in fairly small amounts. Most of the male's testosterone is coming from these cells in the testes, interstitial endocrine cells. And so, of course, testosterone is important for development of sperm as well as other male secondary sexual characteristics. When the sperm is developed in the seminiferous tubules, it's going to make its way to what are called straight tubules, the rete testes, then the efferent ductules, and then to the epididymis, which has a head, body, and a tail in sequence. And then the sperm are going to get stored there at the end of the epididymis until ready for transport outside the body. And again, I mentioned the spermatic cord that serves the testicles. You got your nerve fibers, blood vessels, lymphatics, etc. The ductus deferens also travels through the spermatic cord. So here's where the stuff is taking place. Spermatogenesis is taking place within the lumen of these tubules, seminiferous tubules, contained within all the different lobules of the testes. As the sperm develop in these tubules, they travel into what's known as the straight tubules, which attach each seminiferous tubule to the rete testes, this network of tubules here. From the rete testes into the efferent ductules, then into the head of the epididymis. From here, the sperm is going to travel from the head into the body and then into the tail of the epididymis. And so it hangs out here until it's ready for ejaculation from the body, and then it's going to move upward through the ductus deferens into the pelvic cavity and back out again. And this shows a cross-section of some seminiferous tubules showing the lumen inside. The sperm are developing from spermatogenic cells that are around the outside of the tubule, and they will develop into the lumen and then travel from the lumen through the route that we just discussed. Also, you can see the cystinocytes are contained around the tubules. These are the cells that can help nurture the developing sperm. And also, here you can see in the connective tissue surrounding the tubules, the interstitial endocrine cells, formerly known as Sertoli cells, where the testosterone is getting formed. Or produced, I should say, not really formed. Testosterone is produced here. For the male, the external genitalia consists of the scrotum and the penis. And obviously the penis is for copulation. You have the glands or the head, the prepuce or the foreskin. And internally there's erectile tissue. This is spongy connective tissue that can absorb a lot of blood and becomes rigid. On the ventral side of the penis you have the corpus spongiosum, and that surrounds the urethra, so the urethra travels through this. And on top, the dorsal side, you have the corpus cavernosa. There's two of them. And these are the spongy connective tissue that make up the erectile tissue. So that's going to fill with blood upon sexual stimulation. The parasympathetic nervous system is going to cause blood vessels there to relax. It's going to fill the spongy tissue with blood, and that is your erection. So the spongy erectile tissue goes along the shaft or the length of the penis. And then in a cross-section you can see the two corpus cavernosa that sit on top, and the corpus spongiosum through which the urethra travels. Alright, let's talk about the ducts that the sperm is going to travel through in a little bit more detail, beginning with the epididymis. That's the first place that sperm are going to travel after spermatogenesis in the seminiferous tubules. And remember, you have your head, body, and tail. And inside the ducts of the epididymis, you got some microvilli, which increase the surface area to nurture the sperm. So it takes a few weeks, as it turns out, for the sperm to travel through the epididymis. As they go along, they go from being non-motile, which means they can't swim, to motile. So they can swim when they exit the epididymis. And that's a process that takes about 20 days or about 3 weeks. And they're going to be stored there for up to several months until they are needed. And if after several months they haven't been needed for whatever reason, then they will get sort of digested through phagocytosis and replaced with other sperm. From the epididymis, the sperm is going to travel through the ductus deferens. Again, until very recently, that was known as the vas deferens. So most of us are probably familiar with this term, vas deferens. This is the ductus deferens. It's going to carry or convey the sperm from outside the body in the epididymis into the pelvic cavity. And there, where it meets up with the seminal vesicle at the back of the bladder, forms the ejaculatory duct. From the ejaculatory duct, the sperm is going to meet up with the urethra, which of course is not just for ejaculation, but also for urination. So there are 3 parts of the urethra: the prostatic urethra, the intermediate part, and the spongy urethra. So the prostatic urethra is traveling through the prostate. This is where the ejaculatory duct actually meets up with the urethra, is inside the prostate. This posterior view of the reproductive anatomy shows what we're talking about here. Again, this is posterior. This is showing the back of the bladder where the ductus deferens widens into what's known as the ampulla, and then it's going to join up with the seminal gland fluids here in the ejaculatory duct, and then the ejaculatory duct is going to join up with the prostatic urethra. So we can't see it, but it also, this is where urine would come through as well, right here. And then from the prostatic duct, you have the intermediate part. I should say that from the prostatic urethra, you have the intermediate part of the urethra, and then it travels into the shaft of the penis, and it's going to be known as the spongy urethra at this point. So prostatic, intermediate part, spongy urethra. And this view also shows the seminal glands, which is where most of the seminal fluid is going to be produced, in the seminal glands, which are on the back of the bladder. So the semen is viscous and alkaline. It's got a lot of fructose and citric acid in it, which is going to provide energy to make ATP for those swimming sperm. It's got prostaglandins, which are going to help the sperm travel through the uterus. And again, the ducts from the seminal glands are going to join up with the ductus deferens to form the ejaculatory duct. And then from the ejaculatory duct, the fluid is going to meet up with the urethra inside the prostate, which is a donut-shaped gland, just inferior to the bladder, and it's going to produce more or contribute more citric acid. There's some enzymes and other stuff that's going to help the sperm get activated for its journey. Sometimes the prostate gland can enlarge, particularly in older males, which can put pressure on the urethra and make it more difficult to urinate. It's known as benign prostatic hyperplasia. Cancer of the prostate is the second leading cause of cancer death amongst males in the United States, following lung cancer and preceding colorectal cancer. It used to be doctors would generally perform a digital exam where they can palpate the prostate to check the size of it. They still do that, of course, but also sometimes doctors will use a PSA test, prostate-specific antigen, where increased levels of PSA are meant to represent potentially tumor growth. But this test is not very favored because it leads to a lot of false positives. But it's useful. It's useful to follow individuals' PSA levels over time. And what they do a lot of times nowadays is just take a wait-and-see approach, because prostate cancer affects a lot of older males in particular, and it's a very slow progressing type of cancer. So in a lot of cases, quality of life issues would dictate that just take a wait-and-see approach. Used to be they would remove prostates a lot in cases of prostate cancer, but that's becoming a less common type of thing. And then just below the prostate gland, you have 2 bulbourethral glands. They're going to produce some fluids that's going to help to clean out the urethra from any urine that might still be left there, as well as lubricating things. Alright, gland-wise, you've got two seminal glands, produce about 70% of the semen, and then you have the prostate gland, which produces about another 30% or so. The bulbourethral glands here, and the urogenital diaphragm, which is this group of muscles here. And the semen that's produced is going to contain the sperm necessary for reproduction, of course, and the glandular secretions that are going to help the sperm along their way. It's alkaline, which is going to help to reduce the acidity of not only the urethra that it's going to have to pass through, but also the female's vagina. It's got stuff for energy production, things that are going to activate the sperm and help them swim. And also contains prostaglandins, which as the name implies comes from the prostate gland. This is where these were first discovered. They're also, prostaglandins are all over the body, key in inflammation, as we've seen previously. But here in the semen, the prostaglandins are going to help to decrease the mucus at the cervix. So it's going to help the sperm pass through the cervix and into the uterus, and it's also going to help provide motility to the sperm in the uterus. There's a bunch of other stuff, including clotting factors that are going to actually coagulate the semen just immediately after ejaculation, and that helps prevent the sperm from coming out of the vagina before they're ready to take off and swim, because it takes them a few seconds after the ejaculatory event for them to get ready to travel through the female. And in the next lecture, we're going to talk about the physiology of the male reproductive system.